So welcome everyone. In the interest of time, I'm going to start away right now. My name is JC Calderon. I'm a member of the class of 1992 from the School of Architecture. On behalf of the Yale Alumni Association's Board of Governors, of which I'm a member, I welcome you to tonight's Careers, Life, and Yale Thursday show, the School of Architecture Building Project, Then and Now. This Thursday show is a weekly event that the YAA has been offering now with some 100 episodes during COVID. We hope you'll check out the other shows, and we'll share a link in the chat area. Later on, as the show progresses, feel free to put any questions, and at the end, we'll have a Q&A. Tonight's show, which is part of the Yale Then and Now series that we've started, takes us on a journey to the origins of the School of Architecture's building project, from its founding years in Appalachia all the way to today in New Haven. It's my honor tonight to welcome all of you to tonight's extraordinary panel of alumni and professors of the School of Architecture, each of whom have contributed to the formation and the continuation of the school's seminal program for its MArch-1 students. In order to save some time, we do promptly end about 9. I will ask everyone to read on their own the bios of our esteemed panelists on your own, and I'll just refer to them briefly as we start the program. Tonight's guests include the following alumni who will speak in chronological order in which they attended the school: Tom Carey, Turner Brooks, Andrews Burr, Adam Hoffner, and Rhea Schmidt. We are also going to be dedicating tonight's show to our friend and colleague, Paul Broward, who passed away earlier this month after some 40 years leading the building project with some over 2,000 students. We are hoping that his wife, 44 years, Linda, will join us tonight. So I'd like to begin with you, Tom Carey. If you could set the stage and share with our friends and alumni tonight, how did the building project start?
Okay, I guess I'll take us back to the sort of the mid-60s as a sort of a context for what we were thinking and so forth, and why we ended up in Kentucky. I started in 65, and that was sort of the civil rights sort of stuff in the South was full bore. That was the date of the Selma March. Vietnam was going on. There was a sort of an anti-poverty program, the War on Poverty, that Johnson had sort of put into place. So there was an awful lot of stuff going on in the country. Sort of similar today. We were talking, Turner and I, about Ukraine. You just want to do something. So I think there was a motivation to get out, to get, try and make something happen in a good way. So in my second semester of my first year, I started in 65. So this would have been the spring of 66. A number of us had been sort of talking together. And I think there was some frustration with the first year curriculum at that time. It changed radically the next year, but it was pretty traditional curriculum, moving one structure to another, slightly larger, producing drawings and so forth. And we didn't feel it had necessarily a ton of relevance to everything was going on, the sort of cauldron of civil rights, anti-poverty, and all the rest. So one of our sort of fellow students, Bob Swenson, had spent time in Hazard, Kentucky in 64. And in the course of discussing things, it looked like a good place to get going. Hazard's right in the heart of sort of Appalachia, of coal mining country. And I think it's hard to remember exactly how some of these connections happened, but I think through Charles Moore's connections with the University of Kentucky and their architecture school, we got in contact with a group called the Christian Appalachian Project. And the Christian Appalachian Project started by this sort of charismatic priest, Father Ralph Biding. and it was located in Jackson County. So two of us, then one of their projects that was ongoing was the building of a children's camp, Camp Andrew Jackson, in Jackson County. So another student and I, Steve Edwins and I, went to work with the Christian Appalachian Project on that children's camp, just as a way of getting a foothold into Kentucky, into what was going on. So, and this would have been the summer of '66. So we designed and built a boathouse and changing rooms. Later on, we were joined by Bob Swenson, and designed a dining hall and so forth, and worked there that summer. At the end of the summer, I decided I'd made sort of a commitment to the people and to the region, I guess. I felt like I was in the place I wanted to be at that time. So I decided to take the next year off from school. And in the process of, also during that summer, we'd made connections with this very small community called New Zion, which is not a sort of traditional town as we think of it, more a cluster of, a bunch of small rural farms, in a very poor county, no one had indoor plumbing, so conditions were pretty primitive. But some pretty neat people, and they wanted to do a community center. So what we did in the fall of '66 was bring that to Charles Moore as a potential project for Yale to get involved in. I decided to stay there as an act as a sort of a liaison between the community and Yale. And that's and so Charles Moore amazingly decided to go ahead with it. I think there was an enormous risk involved. It could have gone south in any one of a number of very bad ways, and Andy and Turner can talk to that. Anyway, I spent the next year and a half there in Kentucky, and then I went back in '68, built a house and so forth. And other students in what became the second year class were also involved deeper in the mountains. But getting back to New Zion, we set up a number of meetings with people in the community. And I'm going to turn this over to Turner fairly soon, because all I did was basically act as a liaison. And we did a presentation for the first year class during the fall, talked about the people, the area. And in the spring, and again, I'm going to turn this over to Turner because I was not involved. I was still in Kentucky. You guys started working on designs and eventually moved to construction. But I'm going to toss the ball to Turner at this point because that was pretty much my involvement. My involvement in Kentucky continued, but in New Zion, it was more just liaison.
Yeah, well, that's great, Tom. Well, one thing that I think was so amazing about my first year at the architecture school was we started, especially under Kent Bloomer's tutelage, with these wonderfully, on the one hand, abstract, but on the other hand, real projects. First of which was to design a dominant void where the space of the thing that you were creating was supposed to be more palpably present, more there than whatever it was that was defining the space. So it was a very amazing sort of paradoxical, I call it the quest for the Holy Grail, search for making a space. And I think making a space that was more there than whatever was defining it sort of was a great homage to the issue of space as a kind of event. So that was the first project. And then it went on through other projects that were more sort of traditionally architectural, designing a dorm for 7 people and so on. And then in the spring, it came to the building project and was a class competition. And Andy, you can tell me how you were in the winning group. I was in the losing group. So I can't remember how many groups, but I think there were about 5 groups. and one was chosen, and the project was developed from then on. But what I really wanted to say was that I think what was so amazing is starting with these abstract spatial projects, which I think were very important. We then finished the year with actually building a model of something that actually was built and made in reality. And that was an incredible, I think, way to be educated in architecture. It was a real treat. Another thing I wanted to say is that I think one of the important things about the first building project was that, we commuted down to New Zion and we stayed in the houses of the people in the town of New Zion, the people who had partly instigated the project, and other miners, a lot of more miners. We stayed in little houses, some of which had no running water or electricity. And we really got to know the people. It was a sort of incredible dialogue of staying with these people, getting to know them, and building the project at the same time. And they fed us these magnificent firemen sort of feasts every lunchtime. And anyway, we really got to know the people. One of the issues, which is irrelevant really to this whole thing, but there were so many carpenters, there were 16 students or whatever building that I actually, you were in danger of having your shoe nailed to the siding by one of your fellow enthusiastic carpenters. And so I ended up retreating from the carpentry end and with Kent Bloomer digging the leach field for the septic system. And it was an amazing experience. Just it was like digging a huge tree with the trunk and these expanding branches and twigs for the effluent to go out into. And I realized later that those of you who know Kent, it was really a sort of making of a huge piece of ornament in the field. Kent is known for his ornament. Anyway, and lots of sort of side, I went into a mine with some of the miners that we were staying with, and a little tiny cart with these timbers sort of bending over me and ducking down with my helmet and going. And so there were lots of sort of wonderful side adventures of just sort of getting to know the people in the community as well as building them, the building. And I think Andy really should talk about the building.
Yeah, I'm just going to hop in one more time. I think one of the things that we were trying to do initially, and I think it continued as well, was just sort of addressing, I guess, the role of an architect in society and who the client is. And these are people who, they're not calling an architect up on the phone. So that whole element of maybe social justice and who you're working for, I think was really on our minds at the very beginning of this, and fortunately has continued. So anyway, I'll let that go and turn it over to Andy too.
Oh, is it turned over to me now?
It is. I'll say one final thing. I just think that the school in the last couple of years has a little bit gone back to some of the 60s values of social justice in a very, very good way. And I find that very encouraging.
Tom and Turner have summed it up very well. I can tell you a little bit about the building, and I want to credit Jerry Wagner, who is an architect in California these days. But the building, the final design of the building, a lot of it was Jerry's work, and Jerry was a good carpenter. And we had other carpenters, we had enthusiastic carpenters, but we had a couple that were actually really good, like Peter Werner and Jerry, and they knew what they were doing, and they kind of herded the rest of us around. And we built this building, and it was so exciting to build a building, and especially exciting to be doing it down in the heart of Appalachia. I want to impress people with how poor those communities were in those days, and I suspect it's not much better now. But we installed the only flush toilet in that town, and it wasn't it wasn't really a town. There was no town government. It was the Baptist church that essentially provided any sort of government to the place. There was no police department, no fire department. There's none of that. And it was a really, I thought I grew up on a dairy farm up in the hills of Massachusetts, and I thought we were kind of poor, but I had no idea. When I saw this, I was so stunned. And these people were, as Turner said, the people were wonderful. They were so generous to us. They were giving us so much food, and they couldn't afford that. And we felt sort of terrible about it. So we tried to do as good a job as we could on the building. And there was lots of excitement in building the building as well. Particularly the digging into the soil, which seemed to be, for the septic system and all of that. I mean, it's straightforward. We know you just take a shovel and you dig in the soil. Well, in Eastern Kentucky, the soil is very, very hard clay, and you just don't dig it. We had to get dynamite, but you could just buy dynamite in a store down there. So we got dynamite, put these little sticks of dynamite into the earth, and they make a big bang and blow up, and we'd get another 1.5 inches further down into the clay. So it was quite an amazing experience. And the building proceeded, and it was covered with local oak that we sourced from a lumber mill not far away. And the oak was so hard that you couldn't drive a nail into it. You had to drill a hole to put a nail into it. But it was great fun. We learned a lot. We became very confident that we knew everything about construction now that we had done this building. There was nothing we needed to learn.
Hey, Andy Burr, I'm going to interrupt you for 1 second.
Yes.
Hi, everybody. It's lecture night. I'm about to take the speaker out to dinner. So happy to see you all. Mwah, mwah, mwah. Thank you. Continue to love us. Continue to love the building project. See you soon. Bye.
Nice to see you. Bye. So anyway, for further comment, I don't know what to say other than that it was a wonderful experience. It was a real adventure, and I can't, as Turner and Tom both said, I can't believe they took that risk of sending us down to Kentucky to just out of nowhere build a building. And it was a great experience, and I am so glad that both my daughters and both my son-in-laws got to also build a building. Also, my wife, Ann McCallum, she worked on the Stratford Theater pavilion. Of course, the Stratford Theater burned later on, but they had a good experience with that. And both my son-in-laws and both my daughters worked on the building project. And I think it was just wonderful. And lastly, I want to say hello to all my classmates that seem to be watching on this thing. Hi, guys.
Thank you, Andy. That was wonderful. And in full disclosure, I just like to share that Andrews Burr was my professor, undergraduate, and greatly grateful to his mentorship in those early years.
You were a good student.
Thank you. Well, we're going to move on to sort of move up in the chronology. And Adam Hoffner, if you could share with us images and explain how the building project developed over time. It'd be great.
Great. Thank you, everyone. It's really great to be here. I am now the current director of the project. Somehow I have not seemed to be able to have leave New Haven from the time I came in the mid 90s. Let me see if I can share a screen. I have some images. So I think, what do I have, like 8 minutes to get through 50 something slides? So I'm gonna go as quickly as I can here.
Yes.
So I'm just going to very quickly talk about the who, what, where, when, why, and how of the building project, sort of in its current manifestation. And so obviously the who, we all know, is still it is a compulsory course of the first year for MArch 1 students, and they are what keep me young and also have made me bald. But really the who that I want to mention, that I would imagine anybody who has ever come in contact with is Paul Berard, who sadly passed away about 2 weeks ago now. And Linda, his wife, is here, and I was with Linda and Paul just a couple of weeks ago. And for anybody who has ever come across Paul, he began teaching, I think, in '74. He was the director of the project when I was a student. He hired me after I graduated from school to work with him. And he is the most empathetic, patient, kind man I have ever come across in my life. He was a father to me. He was actually served as a father. My first year working with him was, I had literally that summer lost my father. And Paul he nurtured so many, not only in the love of making, but also in a joy for living, with a true dignified humility. And I would argue that his spirit lives on in every one of the 40 some odd projects that he was involved with, and certainly in the life of the building project now. So I just wanted to say that. So the other who's, of course, are the client. We work with hopefully a progressive client. For the past 6 years, we've been working with an organization called Columbus House, who's an amazing nonprofit that provides both emergency shelter, longer term housing, and social services for those who have experienced homelessness. And so they provide, as I say, temporary housing. But really, I argue to the students that these are our clients. And in fact, this is in New Haven. We know how palpable the need is that exists in New Haven. The other part of the who is, of course, the city itself. For the past 30 some odd years, we've been focused explicitly on New Haven, building housing, and City Hall here, as well as various community organizations and the like, are part of the process of shaping architecture. And the students are exposed to that. They go to community meetings, they present, and most importantly, I hope they listen and they learn. So in terms of the what, again, we build what I hope is considered dignified housing within the city. It is a effort whereby the students design and then they go out into the field and actually work at a collaborative endeavor and construct housing. And they are scrappy. We're not allowed to use dynamite anymore, unfortunately. The powers that be don't allow for that, but we do things like we steal old tables that the school was throwing out, and we make stair treads out of them, as the image on the upper left. And as Turner was describing, we build these models, which then in a couple months' time, somehow we're walking through. And that the experience for the students to begin with wrestling with conceptual ideas and arguing over, liminal zones, and then in a few months' time are actually walking through those liminal zones. I think it's a vehicle for education that you can't teach it. The students have to experience it, and I think that's really what's fundamental to this process. Where we work, of course, is in the city of New Haven. It's a city where almost a third of the population lives below the poverty line to this day. It's a city of fiefdoms, and we have recently this year actually begun working with City Plan in New Haven to look at implementing and helping them roll out a policy of accessory dwelling units. And so we did an analysis of the various neighborhoods within New Haven, had the students meet with neighbors as well as the local alders and the like, and really get exposed to the city within which they study and live. We also have, for the past, 8 years or so, 7 or 8 years now, have been squatting effectively over at a space on Yale's West Campus. They bought the old, the Bear facility over in Orange, Connecticut. And so there was this old warehouse literally filled to the underneath side of the rafters with old mattresses and so forth from Yale. And so we've sort of co-opted some of this space and are able to use that. The timing of this thing is really, it's essentially a packing problem, right? Where we've got way too much to do and way too little time. And to be perfectly honest, way too many people to do it. To have what is this year's class of about 68 people designing a 500 square foot dwelling is a challenge in and of itself. We begin in the spring of their first semester, and we essentially develop designs much like was described by Turner. And one of those schemes, or in fact, this year we actually did a hybrid of a few schemes, which we're sort of merging together now. But we develop drawings, and then we go out into the field in the summer, and we ask the students not only to design the product, but we ask them to consider and design the process through which the product is produced. So they look at how many people it's going to take to do, X or Y. And I tell them generously that they're, somewhere between 5 and 6 of them are worth one laborer in the real world. They're very offended by that, but then they realize in the summer months that I was in fact being generous, perhaps. The why is because there's a need. I mean, the need is palpable, and I think Charles Moore recognized that need, and I think he, perhaps in reaction to what was deemed by some to be sort of the exclusionary, perhaps fortress-like architecture of his predecessor, Mr. Rudolph, spoke of an architecture of inclusivity. And certainly the times, as was referred to, were ripe, and certainly, we could argue that the current condition in our society now with BLM and so forth are sadly not too different. The image on the upper left is that first project in New Zion. The image in the lower right, the lower left. I love the fact that the chipboard or the cardboard models were actually the construction documents, I think, at the time of building a project. That was in West Virginia, and it was that was one of, if not the first project that Paul Berard actually worked on and went down and lived there with the students. In the 80s, when some of the federal funding dried up as a result of the change of the zeitgeist of of federal policy, the building project moved closer to home, where a series of park pavilions and the like were developed. And then in the late 80s, we began constructing dwellings within the city of New Haven. The how, at least currently, I would argue that the how is really, I advocate that we do an analysis of what I call person, place, and policy, and we really ask the students to listen, and we ask them to sort of nurture the nobility of the idea of service. And like I said, it's an amazing vehicle for learning, for the students to experience and to hear from those whom we're designing for and with, and to use and speak in a language which is not archispeak, right? But that is a language of the citizenry is, I would argue, is critically important. We also do an analysis of place, and we do, all sorts of things to determine the conditions on the site. We look at policy issues, both historic. This is a map of New Haven with from the late 30s, and it's obviously a map of redlining. If you overlay the current conditions of the city of New Haven right now, and you were to graph the impoverished areas of the city of New Haven, they look awfully similar to this map of 1930, whatever it is, 37, I think. So we try to think about that. We ask the students to conceptualize ideas. There are big juries. There's a big dog and pony show. We sequester with the client and have big drag out fights and select one or a series of the schemes. And then ultimately we ask for a synthesis from the students whereby they try to take some of their conceptual ideas, and maybe it's about the way that the Earth rotates around the sun, and how those manifest themselves into a set of working drawings that whereby issues of vapor barrier are no longer theoretical, right? They become real. This is of course drawings from Glenn Murcutt. Our drawings aren't quite as beautiful as this, but we ask them to reconcile really exciting things like budget, of which we have very little, and schedule. We ask them to consider how joints are made, and develop a set of drawings around that, and ultimately create some sort of kit of parts. And then after what is an incredibly challenging year for them, we actually go out in the sun and break ground. We dig holes, not with dynamite, but we empower the students to understand how things actually go together, what various materials are, how they are joined, formed, welded, and the like. Sometimes we prefabricate. We learn about the weight of the heaviness or the weight of wet concrete as a form blows out and covers your foot. We sometimes are dumb enough to try to build with cross-laminated timber because we get them donated. And so we have to get enormous saws and cranes, but expose students to some new technologies. And we have good days and we have bad days. That's not an image of the mines of West Virginia, but an image on the right of a couple of students after a long day, and ultimately, hopefully, provide an experience for the students, and provide a level of dignified construction for our clients that we serve. And ultimately, I would argue we sort of empower the students to have that experience that Turner and Andy and the like were speaking of, about this sort of synthetic way of working where the notion of construction and thematic intent become one. So that's it. My buzzer just went off. And I think I'm turning it over to Rhea now. Is that right?
Yes, Rhea. If you could share the more contemporary perspective of a younger alum, this is the now and the then and now part of our show.
Yeah, I should say Rhea is a former student of mine and a teacher. She served as a teaching fellow with me in 2020, where I'll let her tell the story, but she's a brilliant person who's now a colleague of mine. We're working on a project together.
Hi, everyone. Thanks so much for it's kind of beautiful to see sort of where it all started and sort of where it is now, because I think it's so easy to get wrapped up in like the moment of your time and feel like what you're doing right now is the most radical thing, but then to have, Turner, et cetera, to share where it all sort of started, it's kind of amazing to see sort of the cyclical nature of history. It's not linear, but I'd like to think that it's spiraling out, at least with each new cycle we're adding to it. I came to Yale for the building project. I had heard of it through a professor of mine in undergrad. And to me, I think there's so many, like it's just an integral part of the pedagogy, but also such an important one. Architecture is all about simultaneities. And as Turner outlined, about experiencing these simultaneities, it's so hard to really I guess learn just from pen and paper, just from like looking at drawings, just from all these almost like siloed ways of thinking, and to really understand how they all come together. It can only be done if you pick up a hammer, if you actually deal with a 2x4, if you actually try and build a stud wall. And so I think the building project was just an incredible way to kind of break one of those silos. And I think a lot of good architecture sort of understands its complexity and understands the amount of detail that is required for each part of it, but then also realizes and trusts when all of them need to come together again. So I came to Yale School of Architecture for the building project. Absolutely it was just an incredible, so much of it that's exciting is not just like being able to like move from concept to built project, but I think the collaboration that happens from A to Z is also kind of unique, because a lot of architecture, at least in studio spaces, it's sort of your project and you can kind of get wrapped up in your own headspace and you forget that it's about reaching out. It's about connecting not just with your teammates, but also with your client and the community, people, place, policy, as Adam outlined. And the building project was a way to really practice that and not just theorize about it and sort of talk about it, but actually do it. And so I was really lucky to not only do the course, but I interned over the summer and got to build our class's house. And then the following year and the year after that was Adam's TF. Could not get enough of the building project or Adam. And so, and what was really incredible was also then, like, I think during this COVID times, like trying to understand how to teach the building project, where so much of it is like about experiencing it over Zoom and kind of understanding the sort of the pitfalls of that, but also the the patience, I guess, and like compassion that goes in to that as well has been really interesting to sort of talk to the students about, who some of which have unfortunately not been able to partake in that experience. So for example, in 2020, when COVID hit, students were not allowed to do the building portion of their program. And so a few of us recent graduates, 4 of us, and so it was a team of 6, including Adam and Alex, also a director of the project, had our little COVID bubble over the summer and got to complete the House of 2020. And that was extremely a special time given the state of the world, but getting to sort of like work with your hands in such an immediate way and connect with, Columbus House and kind of the urgency of that as it was sort of paired with the urgency of the state of the world. There's something there as well. And I think in some ways, I guess just to highlight another good, amazing part of like the building project, or what like architects do a lot, is kind of contend with scales, sort of like, the scale of a doorknob versus the scale of like policy, and being able to not just like understand them as like separate ways of engaging, but them happening at the same time all the time is you don't really understand that until you get out there. And the building project is, I still think, probably like one of the best parts about the Yale School of Architecture. And it's just really cool to hear its genesis story and sort of where it's heading again, and kind of the momentum that's been built over the past few years. And I think it's sort of continuing to roll in that direction. And hopefully it is continues to be about designing and building with, as opposed to for necessarily, and sort of ideas around collaboration and breaking down silos, I think is what is like most interesting, or what a lot of students now are most interested in. And the building project is a great way to put some of those ideas to practice.
Well, thank you, Ria. Appreciate that. In perspective of the last few years, as COVID has sort of traumatized all of us in some ways. But right now, I would like to welcome Linda Brower to join us. If you can, Linda, please turn on your mic. And we again, on behalf of, I'm sure everyone here, we would like to share our condolences on the passing of Paul. I think we all have memories of Paul that are vivid in our minds. I certainly do. I think I got my hand caught while we were building our project on some thick rope, and it was a moment there that I think Paul helped me with afterwards. But in any event, are you there? Are you here, Linda?
Yes, I am.
Okay, well, welcome.
Thank you.
Thank you so much for joining us. And if you don't mind, if whatever you'd like to share with the community about Paul, we'd love to hear it.
Oh, gosh. Thank you. It's an honor being here with you all. I recognize so many names and faces. Paul did this for 42 years. So he started in 71. And I guess I was with him for most of those. There are a couple of things when Turner, you were talking about initially the Kentucky projects. About 5 or 6 years ago, after Paul retired, we went to see the health clinic in Dawes, West Virginia. Because you always want to know, are these buildings still standing? Has it been trashed? And you're kind of hesitant. Well, Dawes isn't there anymore. It's not on the map. It's somehow been integrated into something else. But the health clinic is still there, and it's thriving. It's right on a railroad track where the coal comes through by the river. And it actually has expanded. Tom Brokaw's wife donated funds for a lung clinic that were then built on to this health center. And we actually were able to meet the man who set up that project. He was with the Army Corps of Engineers, and he remembered the whole thing vividly. There were actually pot shots taken with guns at people on the roof. So but it was all in fun. the And then yesterday I had a visit from one of his students from 1973. So I'm really, the 1973 project, I'm really grateful to have made lifelong friends through this. Andy, you mentioned the Stratford Theater. That's where Paul and I met. I was working at the Shakespeare Theater, and these interlopers came in the summer doing a pavilion, and I saw Paul emerging from a ditch with boots and black socks and blue jeans and a blue shirt and a hard hat. And I thought, yeah, right, this is like the New York outfit for building. Little did I know that, would be the life I'd lead. And we actually, our wedding anniversary is May 1st. And the reason why that was because the project was selected on a Friday and ground was broken on that Monday. So he had a weekend free. He was really devoted. I think a couple of things that I've noticed over the years is certainly massively how the technology has changed. It's just awesome, it seems, year from year. And one of the other things you mentioned, Turner, about the carpenters and the men on the projects. I've read probably just about every application for working further on in the summer. And what I found that a number of women, as it evolved, a number of women really wanted to be on that work crew. And they didn't get the experience in construction. A number of men did have it. Paul really was a proponent of bringing women in a much more significant way, both as managers and in construction. So I think I can't believe you have 68 students this year, though. I think that's just about pretty much it for what I have to say, other than Adam mentioned dignified humility, and certainly that describes Adam. And I know the former students are interested in coming up with some sort of thing for Paul at the school that will keep his principles and character alive. And I certainly hope that comes to fruition. But I want to thank you all for really adding to a great life. Thanks.
Thank you, Linda. We really appreciate your joining us tonight. We have about 10 minutes, and there's a couple of people who have shared some questions. Start with Alberto. Alberto, why don't you turn on your mic and share your question.
Hi. My name is Alberto Lau, and I was a member of the class that went down to Kentucky to do that first building project. And first of all, I would like to plug Richard Hayes' history of the building project, the first 40 years. Richard Hayes wrote this book several years ago, and now, of course, it's been more than 50 years since that first project. But my understanding is that Richard, while writing this book, supported himself by premature withdrawals from his IRA. So it was a labor of love, this book. And he's still lecturing about the project, most recently last month at the University of Edinburgh, was it? It was in the UK last month. So it's a great history of the project. I only saw one mistake in this book, which is that he credited me with being on the team that won the design of that first building project. I actually was not on the team. I was a friend of the team.
You were with me.
Yes, correct. The other thing I want to say is that I have, as Turner mentioned, there were too many carpenters. So instead of doing carpentry during that time, I decided to document the project. And I have dozens of pictures not only of my classmates building the project, but also of the community, the people in Kentucky, the environment, the houses they lived in, the landscape. And I'll be scanning those in the next few months and posting those in our class website, yalearch1970.com. The other thing I want to say very quickly is that, as Tom mentioned, there were many pitfalls in starting that project. That project was both a great success and a failure. It was a failure because, in fact, it did not lead to a more cohesive New Zion community. And eventually, my understanding is that people were fighting over the building, fighting over who should have the keys, who should get used to it, who should govern it, and so on. And eventually the building was demolished. But it was a great success for our class. I don't think there's anybody in our class that did not learn from that project. And it was, in another way, a huge success. There's very, very few classes, architecture classes, that are not as cohesive as ours. We forged bonds during that building project that are strong until today. So much so that when I built the class website, yalearch1970.com, I had 23 classmates participate out of a class of 30, of whom 4 or 5 have already died. So that was a huge participation rate. And so I encourage you to go to that website, yalearch.com, yalearch1970.com, and in which every classmate, 23 classmates, give their views, not only about the building project, but about how Yale affected them and how they view their careers as a result. Thank you.
Thanks, Albie.
Thank you, Alberto. If you could share the website on the chat so everyone can be sure to get it. But we don't have as much time as I would like. I'm sure you would like. But I wanted to mention another person who's asked a question. You mentioned the UK, Alberto. We have, I think I could call it an international audience with my wonderful classmate Benny O'Looney from London joining us.
Yeah.
And so, Benny, if you would like to please unmute yourself and share your question, we'd love to.
Oh,
hear.
yes. Great to see you all. Thanks so much. It's exciting to tune in at 2 o'clock in the morning here at Greenwich Mean Time. So many happy memories of the Yale building project, and great to hear these stories. And I think some of the things that travel with me, in addition to connecting with natural materials, vernacular architecture, which is something that we all really need to engage in at different times in our life, certainly very keenly connected with the vernacular scene here in South London. But JC, do you remember when we tried to cycle from New Haven up to Turner's studio in rural Vermont, and we really just couldn't get there? But we just about got to this, we slept in that, behind that school, remember?
Yeah.
And we made that kind of tent out of things that we found in tarpaulins. And then we got to this place, Yes Tomorrow. Was it not something like that?
That's exactly
Tell me
right.
more. But there was shades of the possibilities of the Yale building project in these strange houses that we encountered
Prickly Mountain.
together in the landscape there. Unforgettable. But back to my point, could there be another dimension to the Yale building project that deals with historic buildings and extending and enlarging, working around, repurposing? This is at the heart of a lot of the stuff we do here in London, is working with the historic environment and trying to preserve the best buildings on our high streets and, town centers. And maybe that's another horizon for the Yale Building Project to deal with aspects of enlarging and research urban history, trying to a certain amount of reinstatement, expansion. It must be a part of the narrative, I would say.
What a good idea. Benny, I support that wholeheartedly.
Well, and Benny did recollect our travels through Vermont as in those Easter breaks or whenever it was. An amazing experience. We do have an ability, I'm being told, to go on just a few more minutes after 9. If anyone has more questions, we don't have a strict cutoff, but generally speaking, the program is an hour. We'd love to go, if anyone has a question right now, they want to share a point that I haven't necessarily responded to, but thank you, Benny, for that. And thank you for joining us from London. Does anyone have a question for any of the panelists or for Linda? I cannot express enough gratitude that everyone here has come together to pay homage to Paul Broward and his legacy and all the lives that he influenced, as well as all the great persons who have contributed this evening and their contributions to the school in many ways. Tom, I think Turner relayed to me earlier, your commitment to social justice, and which I share, and I appreciate everything that you were involved in sort of creating this program and influencing Charles Moore's deanship. So again, I'm happy to take another question. Alberto, I believe I was told that there's some people doing archival interviews for the school. I don't know if you want to share any information about that. But,
well, one of the things I did in creating this website for our class is to create videos of every single classmate. And I basically asked 3 questions of each classmate. One is, how did Yale Architecture School change or influence your life? So each one of the 23 participating classmates answered that question. The second question was, what is the one thing that you want people to remember as your legacy? And the last question, the third question was, in the next 10 years, what are you eager to do? And so if you look at the website, there's 3 videos per classmate, at least 3 videos, there's more, answering those 3 questions. The other videos are also very interesting. There's one section of the website dedicated to the first year building project, in which Tom Carey stars, of course. And that's the section where I will be adding the photographs that I took at that time of the community in the building project. And there are pictures of the dynamite explosion, for example, and there are pictures of Kent Bloomer digging the septic field, and Turner Brooks as well, digging that septic field. And there are other ones which are of interest. Ron, who was the dean of the architecture school at Tulane, Ron Fieldson, had an experience with Donald Trump as a client. So there's a video about that experience, and there's all sorts of ancillary things like the A&A fire, Woodstock, May Day. That's right. There's a whole. I did a documentary on May Day. You can watch that. It's 22 minutes.
Alberto's movie on the Black Panthers.
That's May Day, right? Yeah.
1970.
1970.
well, thank you again, Alberto, for all the work you've done to document and help record the experiences of your class. So Adam Hoffner, I'll leave it to you to decide to let us know if any Alumni's idea will take off. But thank you again for all the work you've done and sharing those images tonight with everybody. Thank you, Turner Brooks, my professor at the school, and like I said earlier, Andrews Burr, my mentor at Williams College, and everyone at the School of Architecture for all that you do to make it a wonderful community for all of us. We're very, very proud to be a part of this community and to have known all of you and to sort of continue to know all of you. So with that, I don't want to keep you longer than you were expecting, but again, please let us know any thoughts afterwards, and keep in touch and follow these websites and histories and get that book. And if no one else has anything to say, again, I will thank the School of Architecture, the Yale Alumni Association, which has sponsored this event, and encourage you to participate in the School of Architecture moving forward. So with that, I bid you a good night and thank you again.